that moment, she's asking me this question in the midst of everybody, and whereas I searched my mind for the right words, the right scripture, what to quote, and I just blanked, just completely blank.
What role do you think finance plays in advancing the work of God?
Oh, first, just looking at my story, if you take money out of that picture, it's like it all collapses. It all collapses. And this one girl made a decision to live with a little less so I could live with more. She lived simply so I could simply live.
Well, guys, welcome back to the Kingdom Business Podcast. You guys are in for a real treat here. I am joined by somebody you're about to hear from. His name is Richmond Wandera, and he's got an incredible story. And it's really a story of what the Lord can do with one life when somebody decides to commit and say yes. And he's currently in Australia, which is why we had the opportunity to do this. He serves in the capacity of a board member for Compassion UK, but I guess more importantly, a graduate of the Compassion program. And if you've been in our world, you know that every single Kingdom Business Summit, we partner with Compassion, we bring them in, we raise money, we help businesses in developing countries start and thrive, and it's a real delight. But today we get to have a conversation with somebody who entered the program, came through the program, and to this point has done something pretty incredible in their life. So, Richmond, why don't you say g'day to the Kingdom Business community, and start by telling us your story. An event happened when you were 8. Tell us what led up to it and what happened after.
The Kingdom Business community, I want to bring greetings from Uganda. In fact, let me say warm greetings, because Uganda is warm and it's only appropriate for me to say warm greetings to you. My name is Richmond Wandera, and I'm very delighted to share with you my personal story, the story of my community, and the story of my country, Uganda. Mine is a story that takes various turns, and I think the first thing I would like to make sure that you understand is that I come from a big family, and we were in a very healthy space in Uganda. Even though my mom was married off as a young girl, and by the time she was 25, she had 6 children, she had my dad. And my dad, Stephen, was a hard-working man. He was a man who was diligent in his work, and we as kids were never in fear or in a place where we thought we have no future guaranteed, until that changed. I was only 8 years old when my father, he was murdered. And he was murdered in the presence of my mom. So as you can imagine, that day I lost both parents. My father was gone physically, but my mom, she was not the same again, emotionally and psychologically. Remember, she was married off very young. No education, no skill, no trade. Now she has 6 kids around her. I was the third born of them 6. And soon, what we feared the most happened to us. We had this knock from the landlord. He's knocking on our door with the news that we could no longer live in our house. So we ended up going to one of the worst slums in East Africa called Naguru. And that became our home. Long story short, by the time I was 10 years old, I had suffered from malaria over 10 times. Kicked out of school. I was on the street until Compassion stepped in and made the difference I so desperately needed. A few years later, I was graduating with my bachelor's degree in accounting. Served as an accountant for a while, entered the business world of Uganda, and then an event happened in my life that shifted my path into the pastorate. And so I'm delighted to share with you that today I am the lead pastor of the very church that I walked into as a little boy looking for hope. And so it's a joy to connect with you, Kingdom Business.
It's an epic story. You skipped a lot of it.
Yeah.
So around 8, you go to the slums.
Yeah.
How did the Compassion journey start? Like out of desperation?
We were very desperate. As you said, I'd skipped a lot of it. But if I can go back to 2 spots in my life. One was when the weather changed in Uganda and the rains became very heavy. In Uganda, living in the slums, when it rains, there's no clear water channels, and so there's stagnant water all over the place. And so mosquitoes began to just spread throughout the community. And we had seen so many kids die of malaria, but this time it was way too many kids. We'd never seen that number. And there was a real fear in my mom's heart that she would bury us one by one. And then there was starvation. We used to go to Nakawa market looking for food. And some days on the street were easier because we found things thrown around, but some days were difficult because you would go into these business spaces where people are moving produce and, trying to pick some things, and some days you'd find some things that are fallen, some days not. And so it was very, very desperate. And even though my mom was bedridden, she decided to get up and look for help. And so she ended up at a church in the community that had the compassion program. And that was the beginning, because when they came to our home and learned of the story, they committed to try to find support for us. And I ended up being connected to a 15-year-old girl named Heather. And this one girl made a decision to live with a little less so I could live with more. She lived simply so I could simply live. And the reason I say that is because when I hear of what she did, taking a babysitting job, giving from what a 15-year-old has, so that someone on the other side can have hope and a future, that decision was so radical as I look back on it today. And so that's how I was brought into the program. Oh, I didn't even tell you this, that a few months after I got sponsored, my sister Doreen, who was 6 at the time, remember I said we were 6 siblings, and it was 3 months later that my sister Doreen also got a sponsor from Australia, Don and Julie Thompson. We will never forget this couple. They stepped into our world and everything began to change. We were all back to school. We had mosquito nets, we had food, we had access to the merry-go-rounds and the seesaws that were planted at the church by Compassion, medical access. To this day, I remember my number, UG 129/0064. Never forget that number, because when I arrived at the church, first time in the church, when I was sponsored, Pastor Peter, he was the lead pastor of our church. And he said, Richmond, memorize this number, because anytime you feel sick, you feel diarrhea or any disease, fever coming in, don't run to the church. Don't even run to the Compassion Project. Run to any hospital around in the community. They are supplied with what they call an S&G list, the list of sponsored children. The hospital will verify that you are sponsored, and guess what? They'll treat you, and don't worry about the bill. Whereas I cannot find English words to describe what that meant to me. That I could now look into my future and say, here I come. And now I could dream boldly, knowing that disease will not snatch my life and my hope from me. And so, looking back, I cannot stress enough how generosity changed my world. Yeah.
So then, incredible story of God's faithfulness. Heather, I guess your willingness to step into your dreams, like it's a multi-pronged story. Mm-hmm. So then you go back at some point, back into that church, and did you become a member of the church?
Yes, and so when I joined the Compassion program that was administered at the local church, I was not a Christian. I would bet many of the children who join in are what we call traditionalists, so they'll be immersed in the native traditional religion of whatever nation it is. For me, it was in the African culture religion, or I would call African traditional religion. And so entering the church and beginning to hear about God's love, beginning to hear about Jesus, that was a strange message to me. And so even though I joined at the age of 9 coming into 10, it took me another couple of years. So at the age of 14, as I was clocking about 15 years old, is when Pastor Peter comes and talks to us. And he pleads with us from the book of Genesis 39 and 40 about this young boy, Joseph, who was going through all this pain and suffering, and he'd done nothing wrong. But there was a God who had a great plan for this young man. And this God sees us, he knows us, he says, come the way we are. And that day, at the age of 14, I gave my life to Christ, and it just changed everything. And I'm delighted to share that by the time I was 16, all 5 of my siblings had come to know the Lord. And by the time I was 19, my mother who wrestled with just these difficult theme of suffering. How does God take her husband, knowing how dependent she was of him? Which God does that? And she wrestled with that. But when I was 19, my mom invited herself to our church, and she sat at the back, and I can never forget this. It's like it happened yesterday. And at the end of Pastor Peter's messaging, my mom's walking forward, and she's kneeling down at the altar, and she's giving her life to Jesus. That changed everything for us. I'll tell you one more story, what happened after that. So a few years in, there was a relative of ours who had taken advantage of my father's passing. He had come in and claimed that some of what my father had was bought with money borrowed from him. And my mom argued, but culturally and for whatever reason, her voice wasn't strong enough to say no. So she watched painfully as the little items, including some of my father's clothes, were taken. And she thought this was the time she had planned to sell some of these items to take care of us. But they were now gone. And to use the word hatred, it feels like an understatement. She just disdain, like the absolute disdain, yeah. So it was really bad. But I mentioned that at 19, my mom had come to Christ. And I can never forget her favorite verse. She kept saying that God is the father of the fatherless and husband of widows. And, people might quote that verse here and there, but to my mom, it was her favorite thing in the world. And a few years later, my uncle, who had abused us in a certain situation, ended up falling sick of cancer. And now he's in Mbale Hospital. And I can't even believe what my mom is saying when she hears of his situation. My mom is so transformed that she told us, let's go take care of him. Whereas I couldn't believe what my ears were hearing from my mom's lips. And obviously there was this hesitation among us as kids, kind of feeling like, oh, he's getting what he deserved. But if you've been exposed to African culture, when mom says to do something, you do it. I remember as a kid, whenever she said, oh, maybe pass me this ladle or pass me that spoon or whatever. And like, oh, maybe let me finish this. Well, you don't know whether it's a shoe or it was a spoon, a plate coming at your direction. So we knew when mom says to do something, you do it. And so we ended up going to Mbale Hospital. And I can never forget the look on this guy's face as he looked at us walking in. Like he couldn't believe that of all people, it was us going to take care of him. To cut that long story short, 2 days before my uncle passed, my mom's hand was in his hand, and she was leading him to the Lord. And the transformation that has come as a result of one 15-year-old girl making one bold decision to join the fight against poverty and to live in such a way that gives other people opportunity, only God would have foreseen this.
Incredible. Have you spoken to Heather?
Oh yeah, I'm in touch with her.
I can imagine. I want to talk about your identity, because it's a roller coaster of a journey, right? So you're in the slums and you're there for whatever, a year or two.
Oh no, I stayed there. Remember, when Compassion sponsors a child,
you were still in the
they don't take you out of the home. You are supported through all your years at that home with your caregivers, parents, brothers, sisters. They don't remove you from the child, and I appreciate that very much.
So after going to the slums, but before compassion, surely you've almost given up on all your dreams.
Yeah.
It's like hopeless?
Yeah. I would say beyond hopeless, because when you lose hope, you enter into a form of despair that it's almost like throwing in the towel in a very, very unique way. As you can imagine, life on the street has no hope on the horizon. It's just, I live today and I do not know when the lights are going out on me. That's just life. My identity was, I think, fast lost on the night when a big storm came through our slum. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning, and the center iron sheet of our house ended up being blown off. And all this water entered our home, and we just watched as our home got filled. As I stood in that rain in the middle of the pitch black night, there's just something that happened. It was the loss of dignity and the loss of identity and the loss of a sense of self. And walking out of that place into mud, and there was nothing paved, nothing. It's just, you step out of that. It's something that I wouldn't wish on any child. But that was the beginning for me.
Yeah. So then, you get to that point that's low, and then compassion comes along, UG 111006, whatever, right? Wouldn't it be hard to hope again and dream again? I guess I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to the business people who have had such a hard run that they've almost given up, and I'm trying to get handles for them based on your story of what was it that had to break off for you to go from that point to a bit of hope and dream again, to stepping into it, to becoming an account. That process would have been really interesting to watch.
Absolutely. I think once a child is very young, they're very open, and they're very, I'm going into the world, I can be all that I want to be. But then life happens, and it happens to all of us. There might be a comment from somebody that is discouraging. There might be a situation that happens and changes our world. There might be a goal that we set, and when we fail to achieve that goal several times, we begin to think differently of ourselves. We thought we would do it, but now we are not sure anymore. That there are several things that come at us all the time. And for me, it happened on the street, whether I was losing street fights, or when I was losing just being there and another kid beat me to maybe some piece of food, of sugarcane that was thrown. And there's all these things that are happening. But I do remember several things that really shifted the pin for me. The first one was Pastor Peter. Pastor Peter, when I came into the church, slowly over the years became the father that I didn't have. And there is nothing that brings stability to a soul or to an individual than having almost like a father figure or someone in their life to say, hey, I am here. You can count on me being present. And I will help you. And I will teach you what it means to be a boy or what it means to be a man. And not just instruction, but speaking directly, almost into my soul. Because whenever he found me in fights, and he's like, hey, Richmond. And you could just see, it comes with safety. He was a bit of a stern individual, but it brought a certain sense of safety. And it's strange how when we don't have that, we kind of are looking around for it. And that goes into, I think, how I would encourage people to think of, do we actually have somebody discipling us? Do we have somebody mentoring or coaching or walking alongside that who is committed to us, and we know that in our hearts? A few people have had the opportunity to have those people in their lives, and I would like to say I am one of them. But the other piece is, there is only so much human effort and human voice can do to the deepest recesses of who we are. And that's why when I came to Christ at the age of 14, I began to read the scriptures, and I began to argue with friends of mine around what was written. And then I began to encounter Psalms such as Psalm 139 that kind of talks about my identity, who I am in him. Then I encounter scriptures like that he rejoices over us with singing, and that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And all these scriptures, and of course, when you first read them, it's like, yeah, that's true for this person and this person, but not true for me. But after some time, with the right instruction and the right words, I began to move from where I was to a new place. And I'll say this was that when I was on the street, I experienced what I call lies, but at the time they didn't feel like they were lies. Because, for example, I felt that I was very ugly. And if there was no evidence for that, because let me explain what I mean. Because my eyes were bloodshot, were very bloodshot when I was on the street. My hair was really hard just from being on the street a lot. My belly was a bit extended. So when the thought crossed my mind that I was ugly, it wasn't without evidence. Like there was something which appealed to reason. Now I needed truth that was deeper than that which I was beholding at the time to change my mind. And that truth came to me through the Word of God, and through the words of people like Pastor Peter and Auntie Joy and Auntie Ruth. They came saying that, Richmond, you're doing it, Richmond. Oh, you did well in school, Richmond, this and that. And that. Oh, man, Richmond. And then they put me on what we call the Child Development Committee, which as a representative of the kids is like, people, okay. Yeah, I could, so I would say that I don't think that it's easy to identify the lies that we actually believe, because they are borderline truth. They always have the enemy source
truth.
A kernel of truth. Yeah, and so I would say that the Word of God, Pastor Peter being in my life, and as I grew up to develop the potential that was already on the inside of me, because that was part of the reality that I had to face as well. Because my reality was I was uneducated. I was hungry, my health was impacted, I had no skills to offer the workplace or to offer any place. So there was a reality of my situation. Now that began to change. When I began to go to school, I began to do well in math. I ended up being promoted to the point where I went from one level to another, ended up being an accountant. So just that's that reality that I've tapped into the accounting space, and I can raise my hand when people say, can accountants raise their hand? That alone just does something to you, And then beyond that, when I became a pastor, I was like, man, all these people trust me to lead them. And then, of course, it comes with a huge responsibility, but it says something about how I am not where I was. And so I just felt like my development kept going increasingly towards that place. And so I would say that one of the business people in Uganda is called Seroma. Seroma is one of the most confident individuals, but he wasn't always confident in his approach to life. He had a rough background. He had tried so many times different innovations and struggled and failed. But I would say that it's these very things, his commitment to Christ and his discipline in prayer. What that does, it gave him such a relationship that made him unshakable. Made him unshakable. It doesn't mean that his business always was profitable or that his business always experienced, it was in the green all the time. No, but there was just something about his relationship with God that just centered him so firmly that he was almost unshakable. And the people would trust him, clients would trust him. If he said, hey, we're going through this problem as a business, clients could trust that he, with his team, they were going to come through that somehow. And so there is something about how the relationship with Christ and with the right individuals really plays a key role in centering us very firmly.
Yeah, so I mean, when the scriptures get inside of us, the promise is that it will turn us inside out.
Absolutely.
Right? New life comes on the inside, and character is refined through those times. Right? That's in this world where everybody wants to have a good life and an easy life and a happy life. It's like, that's not where your character's formed. Yours was on the streets. It was in those moments. It was Pastor Peter. It was somebody speaking life into you. It was your own reading. So it's incredible. Slums, sponsor child, accountant. Then you become the pastor of the church you walk into, and now you run a network of pastors. Tell us about the network.
So when I became a pastor, I really struggled because I'd like to believe that my heart was in the right place. I loved the people of Nagoro community. But I had no training, no grounding. I was thrown into the deep end of ministry with no training, no framework of ministry at all. And so there was an event that happened that ended up really discouraging me. There was one young girl who ended up losing her 3-year-old child, and I had to perform the vigil of a 3-year-old. I wouldn't wish that on any pastor. Anyway, long story short, we had this firewood lit and there's smoke all over the place and fire is going, and we are sitting around this fire, and the lady who lost her child is there, and the choir is singing, and they asked me to stand up and speak. And so as I'm standing up to say a few things to the people, and I'm basically reciting what I've had said on other funerals. We will see this child again. I was speaking on top of my voice, and in the meantime, this dear lady's face is just getting more upset the more I talk. And I couldn't escape that. So I slowed down, I called the choir back, and I came around her. In Africa, there's a way you can go around somebody who just lost and kind of press them in and say, hey, we're here with you. You are not alone in this. And as in doing that, this lady pulled away. And she asked me in Luganda, Omwana w'emyaka seta akoze ki Mukama? What has a 3-year-old child done to God?
Yeah.
Now, if you ever get exposed to a child dying from malaria, it is a sight you can never recover from. And in that moment, she's asking me this question in the midst of everybody, and whereas I searched my mind for the right words, the right scripture, what to quote, and I just blanked, just completely blank. With that embarrassment, I stepped out and I called my pastor, Pastor Peter. I said, Pastor, man, you should have been around. I just can't do this, I'll go back into the accounting space and, I'll work as hard as I can to fund the ministry, but I just don't think this is for me. Anyway, long story short, somebody from Compassion heard how I was struggling through connections, made it possible for me to go to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, of all places. And I ended up completing my master's degree in spiritual formation and discipleship. And all my questions as a pastor, those 2.5 years, I presented them. And it was amazing how scripture has responses. I mean, I was completely blown away. And so I ended up, upon my graduation, realizing that I was in the top 1% of pastors in sub-Saharan Africa that had that level of training. It dawned on me, I was like, whoa, how do you steward this? To whom much is given, much is required. And here was I, and all these pastors with no training. I said, no, let me just create a conversation platform where I'm able to take these theological and ministry training and make these answers available to pastors. And so I came back to Kampala City. And my vision at that time was just Kampala City, because that was my space. I knew the in and out of the city. I was a straight person. I knew where to go. Whereas God had a completely bigger and different vision from what I was starting. Because today, we're not just in Kampala City. We have spread across the nation of Uganda. We have spread into 5 other nations. We have developed one of the most effective and attractive products for pastors. This is it's an 8 competency building product with 8 separate manuals. And the first manual, we call it Pastor Theologian, where we promise pastors, you stick with us for 2 years. By the time you're done with us, there'll be 8 core competencies, not knowledge, because it's one thing to say, I know about the Bible and I know theology, but can you do it? So this is a competence. It's not just a body of knowledge. So the first one is Pastor Theologian. The second one is Pastor Preacher. After you've understood the word, can you communicate it so effectively that you can see change and transformation among the people? But then the next one after that is Pastor Disciple. How do you raise disciples within your congregation and beyond your congregation? And then the fourth one is Pastor Leader. And there was a big assumption there that, oh, because a person loves the Lord and because they are a pastor, that they are automatically a good leader. And we're saying that is the most flawed assumption. Because yes, you bring your uniqueness, everyone brings their uniqueness, and there is an art side of leadership, but there is a science side to leadership, and there is principles which, whether you're a Christian or not, when you learn leadership principles that God has embedded within nature, you can become a powerful, effective leader. And we said to them, learn these principles and apply them, whether in business, in the church, in society, politics, it doesn't matter. You apply these principles, you have high chances of success. So number 4 is pastor leader. But then we have pastor apologist, because we are in a culture that is constantly developing new ways of thinking about life and new belief systems. So we make sure pastors are grounded in that. Then there is pastor family leader, where we teach pastors parenting. What does it look like as a pastor to be a good father, or to be a good mother, and to be a good parent? What does that look like? And because we were seeing a lot of pastors' kids walk away from the faith, and we wanted to make sure that is dealt with. And then the last one is pastor entrepreneur, where we ask the question, number 1, how does God fund his work? How does God fund his mission? How did he fund Jesus' work? How did he fund Paul's work? How did he fund this work? And can we track through how God funds his work? And then beyond that, we step into the responsibility of a pastor when it comes to money. How do you get money? How do you keep money? And how do you grow money? And so all of that, because we are very, very, very persuaded that a time is going to come when Africans must fund their missionaries to the world. And we must prepare ourselves financially to be able to do that. And so, yeah, so those 8 core competencies have since become, a product that has just kind of swept across East Africa. They love our manuals, they love our content. It's very well done, very contextually set. And we're just very proud that thus far, 15,533 pastors as of March of this year have gone through the training. We've seen renewal in the church. We're seeing health. It used to make me very anxious seeing thousands of people come to faith. Hundreds of pastors frustrated that they don't know what to do. But now that is changing, and the church in Africa is becoming more solid. And I believe that with just a few years, with us launching, oh, by the way, we are launching a university as well. Because remember, the last 15 years has been non-formal training, but we have seen the place and the role of knowledge in shaping destinies for nations, for communities, and for individuals. My own story tells that story that, without that education and without that exposure, I can only reach so far, I can only reach so far with so many hindrances and bottlenecks in my way. But when you know how to navigate those bottlenecks because you've been exposed to someone else who went through that bottleneck, and you've dealt through many case studies on how did this person handle this situation, how did this person, that equipping really bolsters the church into a very strong movement that is able to go through so many storms.
Love it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about money for a second.
Yeah.
Because obviously, Heather, she had to put some money up, right? Who knows? God could have found you outside of Heather. Who knows? But that's the way that it happened. Business people play a significant part, I believe, in funding the advancing of the gospel.
Yeah.
They do more than that.
Yeah.
Business people are also in the marketplace as ministers, like that. But there is an element of funding. What role do you think finance plays in advancing the work of God?
Oh, first, just looking at my story, if you take money out of that picture, it's like it all collapses. It all collapses. Money provides immediate relief, immediate support. It provides lifelines and hope to people who don't have the luxury of time. And every day is a miracle for some people to keep breathing, So when you have money, you can provide things like food. You can provide things like mosquito nets. You can provide vaccination. You can provide irrigation systems. You can provide a water well. You can provide anti-malaria sprays throughout a community. all of that, boom, like in our community, there is a gentleman who comes from a space of business, and he realized how we were just carrying a massive weight of electricity bills. So these small homes, they would have a bulb, but they cannot afford these low watt bulbs. There's this very high voltage bulb, and he just had this impression of how would life change for our communities if people don't have to, have light for 2 days in a week and then don't have it in 3 days in a week. And they just started to go to LED, these small 2 watt and 3 watt bulbs revolutionized the entire community. I mean, people now who sell their shops don't have to close their shops at like 6 p.m. because now they can put a light there and keep going with business up to 8 p.m. One person had this vision, an entire community's life has changed. So the role of money, it is so significant. So that's number one. But number two, money opens the door to learning. There are few opportunities to learn that don't cost. Everything costs. If you want to move a society and move our people from one place to another, it's going to cost. Education costs. And so the role of money in changing lives includes funding opportunities for enlightenment, funding the opportunities for education, funding the opportunities to know. But the other thing about money, there is a relationship between money and policy. There is, as you know, there is lobbyists, and everywhere you go, as long as there's politics involved, there will be people who will use money in such a way that causes the nation to see something differently. And so like for our community, because I was sponsored, and because people like Margaret Makoha, we were kids together in the Compassion Program, she's a member of parliament today. Godfrey Kaima is one of the top engineers in Uganda's military, and he's bringing the gospel in some of the darkest places. This is what money did, and just kind of raised a new generation of people who are now advocates. Myself, you talk about Gerald Rovis. Gerald Rovis is the pastor of Bethel Covenant Fellowship. His voice on Spirit FM is constantly reminding the church and reminding the nation to remember the poor. So there's this strong advocacy piece that is going on, and this is all made possible because someone was willing to step into a certain situation financially and make a difference. And I could go on, but I have seen that anyone with money carries a responsibility that few people have the revelation of. Yeah.
What I love about those stories is that it's not about the amount, because the fellow that bought the lights and stuff, that's quite a big amount of money, I'm assuming, for one person.
Yeah.
But with Heather, it was £32 a month, right? And I think no one should get let off when it comes to being generous to God.
Yeah.
I mean, Scripture says if you lend to the poor, you give to God or whatever. So if you give to the poor, you lend to God. It's like he pays back incredibly well.
Yes,
in my experience.
Yes.
Like incredibly well in my experience. So, I think about Heather. I think about that fellow that did all of that. It's vital. That you actually hit the nail on the head before when you said, when the pastor said you can go to hospital and the pressure was off and you could dream again.
Yeah.
That's what money does.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't need, money wasn't the only solution, but it created an environment for you to be able to dream.
Yeah.
I mean, if it can do that for one individual, for a fairly small amount of money, do that at scale and see what happens.
I have watched in my community, and I have come to some conclusions. And number one, that it doesn't take very much to change the life of a child and to unlock their potential. It really doesn't. And having been here as a visitor for these few days in Australia, there is endless potential to change the world by Aussies. There is endless potential that if someone focused, let me put it this way. So it takes $55 to sponsor a child. And I can understand people who suspect that $55 to provide medical care and food and clothing and go to school, I don't see how that's possible. Because being here, I've seen the cost of coffee, just a cup of coffee, what that costs. But you have to look at the economies of scale and how that translates into other economies. where $55 would go in Uganda, there is no telling how far and extended $55 goes. And so when you think of return on investment, and as an accountant, I think in those stuff, like, okay, so if I invest this, what's the return on investment? I think you said it so perfectly when you looked back at the what might be categorized as small investment of $55 a month. But with Heather's faithful $55 a month, I was the return.
Yeah, incredible.
Kingdom return. And I think that's a good return on investment.
Yeah.
And yeah, someone might think, oh, I bought a car, or I bought this big toy, I bought this thing, and that's good return. Look at my house. I'd say that the most valuable return is life change. And if anyone can do even the smallest thing to change the world for a person, that's incomparable to anything we could ever buy or own.
Well, you've heard the phrase, you can't take anything with you. It's not true. You can take people.
Yeah.
It's the only thing you can take with you is people.
Yeah.
Into the kingdom
profound.
of heaven. You can't take anything, but you can take people. Right?
That's so profound.
So I guess, I've got two questions for you. This is the first one. Slums, sponsor, accountant, pastor, network. You're just getting started, really? What's coming? What's next?
A university.
Your own university?
My own university.
And then?
I'll give you a bit of why that is, just gives me chills to even say it. After my father died, I was not only kicked out of our home with my siblings and my mom, I was also kicked out of school. But I didn't take that easy, because I began to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and try to go and jump over the school fence. And many times I succeeded, jumped over the fence, and I hid among kids who had already paid school fees, and I attended class. But sometimes I was caught. And I remember one time when I was caught for escaping into school. And I was given a pickaxe and a spade. And I was told to tear down 2 massive anthills. You see these hands here? I mean, they were mangled, bloodied, and I kept going on for 2 days, tearing down anthills, whereas all I wanted was to go to school. It humbles me and baffles me at the same time that the same kid who was kicked out of school is now building a school. Only God could have foreseen this. And in May of next year, May 17th, it will be a Saturday, we'll be launching Cornerstone University. This is a school that God gave me a vision for 3 years ago. He's brought a lot of good thinkers to help dream on how to create an alternative university. We are not content with the current universities. We're not content with the product that's coming out. We're not seeing results. And we are dreaming of a new way to do university and to do education that's very practical, that's very centered on community change. And we're saying to the nation and to the National Council of Higher Education in Uganda that whatever happens in university must be relevant to the farmer out there, must be relevant to the business in the industrial area, must be relevant to the person in the community. We've got to make sure that universities become relevant. And so we are dreaming of all of that. And so it's been a 3-year journey. And finally, in May of next year, once we finish the buildings that we are building at the moment and finish all the recruiting that needs to happen and all the paperwork, we'll be launching a school. And it, again, just baffles my mind. I can't wrap my mind around how God knew that the story would turn around to become what it is today, that I would be starting a school. It's just really, really humbling. And that's partly because I believe 100% that a particular type of education delivered in a particular way can change a nation. Yeah.
It totally can. I've met a bunch of Africans in my life.
Yeah.
And there's one thing about them that I find incredibly attractive, their prayer life.
Yes.
you know, whether they be Nigerians or Kenyans, or, they just have this ability to pray and pray hard and authority. Not just a large volume of words.
Right.
But I don't know whether it's just because that's all they had, right? At some point, it was like it was God and nothing else. But I think that's one thing that you should export to the rest of the world is how to pray in earnest. You know, a lot of us in these developed countries, 2 minutes into praying and we've run out of words. And the Africans, man, they are just at it, and I think it's beautiful.
I don't think we don't overthink the promises of God or the Word of God, and being exposed to your culture here. Did God really mean that we could pray and He can actually answer? And you know, there is a lot of reason, and I believe in reason, as you can imagine. I've really leaned into reason and story and logic and all of that. But I think the African church could contribute very significantly to the global church by sharing, look, if God said it, believe it. Just believe it and go for it. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, to us, God is close and He is able to do what He said He can do. And so there is a fervency there. When someone, for example, says to me, oh, I have this migraine, I have this headache, it's not uncommon for me to say, let us pray now. Okay, let's believe God now. But I think in some cultural spaces, it's, oh, I hope you feel better. God, you know, take a break if you can. And, you know, there's no one thing that's wrong or the other one is right, or no. But it's just that there is relating with God as though God is like some distant Father who loves us, but He's so far away. And if we can sort out something without Him, He prefers that. And only when it becomes really complicated and difficult, then we need Him. Well, no, even for the simplest things. My mom used to pray, giving thanks for like the most petty things you could possibly imagine. But Oswald Chambers calls it practicing the presence of God. That can be part, even the smallest decisions. Sometimes we think, oh no, I'm smart enough, I'm experienced enough, and I can make that business decision very quickly. Oh, yeah, what's that? Oh, of course this. But a person can really shift their way of life and the way of approach of life to really practicing God's presence. You will be shocked. Sometimes, like I'll tell you how that plays out in my own life. So I have a time between 1 and 2:30. So it's an hour and a half every single day where I place nothing on my schedule. And so I have a very busy morning and planned up a very busy afternoon. But I said, God, there are chances, because I'm not perfect and I'm constantly a struggling individual, that I might miss what you're saying to me. And so I planned that time out, and I'll just pause and I sit in my chair in the office and I say, Lord, I'm not going to do a thing until I hear your voice, that sweet voice telling me what it is you would have me do today. And, you know, sometimes it would seem, oh, no, you should have done that previous night. No, I do that the previous night and have up with my schedule. But that moment of practicing His presence daily, this happened not too long ago. I'm there and I hear God's voice speak to me saying, call Patrick. I was like, this is a friend of mine I've not seen in 3 years. To ban Patrick. And I was like, I have not. It's kind of what an awkward call that would be, because I haven't seen him in 3 years. Well, whereas I just pick up the phone and I call Patrick. He doesn't answer for the first call. I was like, oh, okay, so nice. I didn't expect him to. But then call him again. Then I call him again. And Patrick answers. And Patrick says, Richmond, how is it that you're calling me? I said, look, I was here in the office and I felt God calling me to call you. And said, did you talk to my mom? I said, no. Like, did you talk to my sister? I said, no. God told you to call me. I said, yes. He broke down and started crying. I said, Richmond, I'm here in my small living room and I was just about to take my life. Long story short, Patrick ended up praying with me on the phone. I said, you don't hang up until I reach where you are. I'll tell you this, that there is so much God wants to do in the world, and He's asking, who shall I send? But sometimes we're so busy with our own plan for our day and our week and our month, and we've put no room at all. And so opportunities for investment passes, opportunities for impact passes, opportunities for life-transforming conversations passes, because, hey, we have the next thing. And so there is a line in Uganda that is thrown around that I'd like to even share here. It just kind of speaks to how fast-paced life in the West is. And we say, people in the West might have the watches, but we have the time.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
We have the time. And that slowing down sometimes allows for reflection, allows for us to hear that voice, come away with me for a while and let's rest a bit. And from there, when people bounce back into business and bounce back into ministry, man, they are unstoppable. They are unstoppable because they're so in touch and so centered. And yeah, unstoppable indeed.
That's so good. I'd love it if you would just give you space to speak some encouragement to the Kingdom business community, right? You know, they're watching. It's been a long interview. They're probably sitting there. Just without framing it, just speak to them. This is a group of hungry entrepreneurs that want to do something for the Lord. What would you say to them?
My life was changed because of one act of generosity of a 15-year-old. I'm here today. I consider myself a good return on investment for the $55 that was invested by this 15-year-old monthly and faithfully. It's a case of God taking like fish and bread from a little young boy and then using it to spread and serve 5,000. Today, I am the senior pastor of the church that I walked in as an 8-year-old without hope. Today, I am leading Pastors Discipleship Network, a ministry that's now touching over 15,000 pastors in 5 nations across East Africa. Today, the vision in my heart to build a university is very close to fruition. May 17th next year, 2025, I will be launching this school with the support of so many who have gathered around this vision. One decision. I believe that in your hands, God has positioned you and called you to be an agent of hope, to be an agent of transformation. And when you apply yourself and learn and lean into the needs that God would have you lean into, with the right collaboration and with the right connections, God is going to do incredible things through you. And many of you are already seeing these incredible things happen, but God is challenging you now to dream bigger and to not settle, because just being in the country of Australia positions you in the top 1% of pastors around the world who have unique access and capacity to change communities, to change entire regions when you mobilize and work in the dependence on God. So I want to pray for you that God will bless your business, that God will use your business to advance His kingdom across the world. Jesus is who can change this world. And if your business can bring Jesus to some of the darkest places on the world, good on you. We in Uganda will celebrate because of every decision and sacrifice that you have made.
You're amazing, Richmond, and incredibly articulate. Very good looking. Just thought I'd throw that in there because
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, it lifts my spirit. It makes me want to go and do more. It fires me up to want to have more impact, build a bigger business, go and do more. You've got one life, I've got one life, and I want to absolutely maximize it. And when I get across people like you, and you're an incredible story, it sharpens.
Yeah.
It's like let's link arms and go even harder.
Yeah.
You know, I literally want to get into heaven, and I've given it all. I'm spent. I have nothing else to give.
Me too.
And so You know, whether this is a divine appointment, I would call it one, but it's a real blessing for me. And I thank Compassion for, I guess, you know, putting this together as a connection, because it's an incredible story. And I know for you, it's still unfolding. It's a small portion of the way through. And you're touching many lives, many lives. You know, you gave the example of the fire, the eulogy, the 3-year-old girl. Now you've got 50. Think about the flow-on effect of equipping those 15,000 to do a better job. I mean, it's incredible what's going to take place. So, so guys, I want in the comments below, what was the top one thing that Richmond said that jumped out to you? There's heaps for you to pick from, so it shouldn't be hard. Blessings to you as you go and set up this university and get it open. We'll be praying for you and cheering you on. It's going to be amazing. And I can't wait to come and visit you in your home country.
It will be a great joy and delight. I'm excited even to just consider that thought.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bless you, man.
Bless you.
So good to catch up.